Hello. Now we'll talk about Herman Hertzberger, a very important Dutch architect who himself was born on July 6th, and today is July 6th. So we wish him happy birthday. He's actually 91 years old today. So Herman Hertzberger is one of the most famous Dutch architects, Professor Emeritus, and the last Dutch architect to receive the prestigious Royal Gold Medal. Hertzberger is one of the oldest active Dutch architects. Here he was when he was younger, and here he is now, maybe close to this age, still vigorous and obviously looking at some architectural project. I mean, maybe not obviously, but I think this is the case. Herman Hertzberger. He said this, and I think we should talk about this. He said the origin of architecture is in the public. Very, very interesting statement. And I'm not sure it's quite like this, but I do think that the public dimension is very important indeed to architecture. Res publica and less privata. But you also need, you have the public, but I also think you have the, the private matter, the individual. But he says the origin of architecture is in the public. And his architecture, his built works do exemplify this statement. For him, indeed, the public dimension of architecture is very, very important. Actually, I don't think I have in this presentation a project by him for, let's say, a private house, although he most surely did build. Some drawings of Herman Hertzberger. He uses a strict geometry, not always, but most of the time. He uses the grid, but he also, being a countryman of being a countryman of the same country to which Johann Huizinga belonged, the one who wrote Homo Ludens, you can see a certain playfulness here as well. Even if he operates with squares and with the grid, there is a playfulness which brings in some instability. And that instability is very important because that instability creates a dynamic space for interactions, for negotiations between individuals who compose the so-called public, which to him, as we just found out, was and is very, very important. So now I only show some drawings, but even in the drawings, the public dimension of architecture is reflected rather explicitly. But if you see in this drawing, and he built this building, you have the one, meaning the whole, but you also have the fragments, the multiplicity. So you have unity and multiplicity. You have the individual, you have the sum of individuals that compose a whole. And I think this is important. You don't have just a monolith, a whole, within which you don't recognize the fragment or the individual. You recognize the individual, but you also notice the whole. So you have, as I said, variety in unity or multiplicity in unity. And this is very symptomatic for his architecture in many projects that he did and does. And he did build a lot. there is a certain serialism, meaning, there is some kind of a structuralism that he belongs to, but he's able, because of homo ludens, to bring some, movements or some dynamic quality which destabilizes a little bit the system, and thus freedom is not far away. You see clearly here, he has this, conglomerate of squares that connect, but there is also, but I would say that in his architecture, the balance between l'esprit de géométrie, the spirit of geometry, and the spirit of finesse or fineness, as Boileau told us, is, in my opinion, a little bit in the favor of the spirit of geometry. Ideally, they should be equally, they should have equal weight. The spirit of geometry and l'esprit de géométrie and l'esprit de finesse, the spirit of geometry and the spirit of fineness. In his work, they are almost equal, but I think a little bit the balance is in the favor of geometry. Montessori School in Delft, 1960-1966. So let's read a little bit about it. This school, designed in 1960 and extended several times since, has a spatial articulation that permits activities to take place simultaneously without one disturbing the other. The classrooms, which are L-shaped so as to articulate different zones of concentration, together generate a complementary wide central corridor which meanders diagonally through the building. Much attention has also been given to the external zone and the entrances, creating spaces which can be used in many ways. Every effort has been made to soften the threshold between the outside world and the school. The playground is not closed off and can be used by local children after school hours. So, just from this description, we see that Herman Hertzberger liked those zones called in-between, the in-betweenness that very often important architects are very concerned with, in-betweenness. In between the private and the public, in between the exterior and the interior, interstitial spaces. He is a very rigorous architect. You can see that he builds very well, very convincingly. The tectonics are clearly served, and yet because he knows how to manipulate geometry in with a certain degree of freedom or playfulness, the geometry is not very rigid in the end, although at the beginning perhaps is. You wonder how children learn to be in such a school which promotes openness. Let's compare this openness with a school where, the classrooms are enclosed spaces, where there is a closed door, and there is no fluidity of space like it is here. These children grow up in an environment which encourages them towards dialogue, towards debating ideas, to a climate of sharing. And as you can see, how many children do this sort of play? No, it's about playing within the school. Yeah, it does matter. It does matter when these children are encouraged to be not afraid, are encouraged to be playful, are encouraged to be creative, and to be open towards each other. They develop into citizens of the country and of the world who are, in a healthy way prepared to assume not the rigors, the functions of social life. But the building is built, you know, look even here. It's a strict architecture, but it goes beyond strictness. It goes beyond, you know, rigidity, because it is animated in essence by what he believed in, that the public is the origin of architecture, meaning dialogue, interaction. Even these chairs here, you know, let's call them chairs. They remind me of the wooden boxes in Le Cabanon by Le Corbusier. Not really the most comfortable chairs, but you know, still be you know, offering the chance to sit on. Playfulness within the school, yes, as it should be. You look at these children; there are cubes. The structure of the building is based on the cube, but because he problematizes the grid through a certain degree of freedom, the children are, you know, enjoying this, as it's obviously seen here. And we see, I guess, you know, some kind of a, I don't know, development of the school from 1960 to 1968. This was also the period in time that was animated by social activism, political engagement, militantism, you know, the famous 1960s. So I think people at that time understood more perhaps than at other times the value of social interaction and engagement with society, and even with political methods, fighting against the war, fighting against the banks, fighting against the obsession with money. Maybe that kind of idealism should come back. Daegun experimental housing in Delft, 1967, 1970, again, the same period, no, at the end of the 60s. So the idea determining the carcass houses, a prototype, no, 6, 8 prototypes of which have been built in Delft, is that they are in principle incomplete. You see, again, although he uses the grid very rigorously, he is not afraid of incompleteness. Contrarily, he promotes it. The plan is to a certain extent indefinite. So that's what I was trying to say when I mentioned l'esprit de géométrie, the spirit of geometry and the spirit of fineness. The spirit of fineness initiates the open-ended quality, the indefinite. So the plan is to a certain extent indefinite, so that the occupants themselves will be able to decide how to divide the space and to live in it, where they will sleep and where they will eat. If the composition of the family changes, the house can be adjusted and to a certain extent enlarged. What has been designed should be seen as an incomplete framework. The skeleton is a half product which everyone can complete according to his own needs. The house consists basically of 2 fixed cores with several different half-story high levels constituting the living units, which can accommodate a variety of functions: living, sleeping, study, play, relaxing, dining, etc. In each unit, level part can be partitioned off to make a room, the remaining area forming an indoor balcony running along the entire living hall or void. These balconies, which can be furnished according to the tastes of the individual members of the family, together constitute the living area for occupants. There is no strict division between living area and sleeping area, with the imposition of going upstairs. Each member of the family has his own room as part of the large communal living space. This is very interesting because I thought of it. Why is it that we call only one room living room, as if the other rooms are not for living? This plan represents an attempt to get away from a number of persistent stereotypes which still dominate housing today. Well, here we have a creative architect, and creativity fights against stereotypes. So the creative architect does the same thing. And Hertzberger was and is a creative architect. Again, the end of the 60s, an architecture which is which offer a resolute frame, but within the frame there are various degrees of freedom and allows for individual choices. As we read, you know, there are no strict divisions here. He provided the incompleteness of a frame which allowed for the participation of the inhabitants to model, to craft their interior space according to their specific needs. So to put it another way, this is an architecture where there is some kind of a balance between order and disorder, between what is definite and what is indefinite, between what is complete and what is incomplete, because he provided the complete frame, but within the frame, the incompleteness or the dynamic life asserts itself in unexpected ways. Order and disorder. Some offices, 1968, 1972. You could say here there is a certain amount of rigidity because the grid is very strict and obvious. But if you look at one fragment, let's say just one unit here, one module, because it is a module, this almost reminds one of, you know, there was a famous house built in Japan. I forgot exactly how it was called. You see, the corners are free in the sense that, you know, the supports for each module are in the middle of the module, and the corners are rather free. You can enter through the corners, and then on the superior level, there is glass. So within one module, the module is not rigid in itself. There is a repetition of these modules, yes, but because the unit has a certain degree of freedom within, the whole complex somehow doesn't fall into, you know, something very static or, you know, something very dogmatic, very rigid. So let's read a little bit. An office building as workspace for 1,000 people, designed as a single articulated unit consisting of 60 tower-like cubes. Well, they are not really towers, but connected on each floor by overpasses. The extensive central street area, in which the space is equally developed in vertical and horizontal direction, calls to mind the street pattern of a medieval town. Now, when we looked at that picture, that image, normally we would not think of the medieval times. But let's contemplate further this building. Also, the materials of the glass-roofed inner space evoke an outdoor atmosphere. In each corner, there is a place to have coffee, to relax, or to hold meetings. The illumination throughout is an integral part of the architecture, in this case conceived in terms of street lighting. The transparency and lightness of the metal stairs, together with the glass brick fillings, create a harmonious contrast with the heavily dimensioned main structure of the building. We try to arrive at a wealth of formal expression by using simple, sober means to create a feeling of spaciousness, even when working on a small scale. So images from this building, or should we say this architectonic organism composed of many units that come together. So again, you have unity and you have multiplicity, both horizontally and vertically, as you can see here. And in this picture, we actually see a confirmation of the fact that what he said, he meant. That is, the public is the origin of architecture. What else do we see here? Continuous interactions between people. So it's this public dimension which animates Herman Hertzberger's architecture at its very core. The togetherness of people. So who wouldn't work with some pleasure in such an office? You have your own individual desk, your own telephone, but you also have communication across the space with other, other people, other spaces, other functions. So again, the public dimension of architecture, I think he was right, is very important. Interactions, dialogue, eating, working, maybe even playing. It's possible they have somewhere even a ping pong table, I like to think. Otherwise, structurally speaking, the building is very rigorous. You wouldn't expect this openness that happens inside, indoors, from even contemplating the plans or the axonometric drawings or the sections. But you see, actually, even here in this fragment of the plan, that he was working in the direction of communication, interaction, dialogue. Yes, he worked with a square, but you see there are variations of this square, and so he is playful with the cube, very much so. A music center in Utrecht, 1973, 1978. Just a second, please. Oh, I cannot move this. Rather than trying to distinguish itself as a temple of music, the building, situated on a market square, seeks to be absorbed by the city, informally as an integral part of it. So again, he was against building a temple of music. The music center is accessible from the surrounding shopping arcade. The intimate dimensions refer to 19th century Parisian arcades or arcade. We do not derive the forms from the past, but rather the articulation and atmosphere. Columns occur in many lengths, but with their capital-like heads, they constitute a formed family, helping to establish an architectural order throughout the building. There is relatively little differentiation in the materials used, inside and outside, their finish and proportions, except that the walls of the foyer are finished with wood and specially designed wall tapestry. So wood and tapestries, that is the softness of what the wood is and the softness of what the tapestry is. And this softness, I think, is connected to that spirit of fineness, which balances the spirit of geometry. The main concert hall is designed to accommodate a variety of uses. The idea that a good view contributes to good listening gave rise to the amphitheater form, while the configuration in the round not only brings players and the audience closer, which is of high concern to him, to bring the players and the audience closer, but keeps the distance between speaker and listener to a minimum. Again, it's about bringing together, only connect, as Vincent Scully wrote, quoting from a British writer. roster. The foyers are fairly minimal too as a result of over-cramped building lines, but have a wealth of places on offer. These range from introverted corners where one can withdraw from the crowd and places where one has an overall view of things, to others giving you a glimpse into the auditorium or of the town outside. And this is the building. In a way, both closed, defined, formed, and unformed, indefinite. It's a huge space for concerts, but you can tell that the architect was very, very concerned with crossing the frontier between I and zoo, as Martin Buber would say. In other words, was very concerned with bringing people together as much as possible without having them lose their own individuality. I mean, even here, it's a concert hall. You have adults, you have children running. This is not what one would easily expect, in a large urban concert hall. Children running around, but they are stimulated by the openness of the space, by what the architect promoted. And other functions here as well. You can tell again that this is an open society, very, very willing to cross frontiers and to communicate. The Dutch. And look at these balconies also. There is no dogma, there is no inhibition. It's really about a social phenomenon that flourishes, and there are these, you see the musicians, interacting with the public. So the frontier between the public and the performers is almost erased. Very nice. Maybe the octagon is also auspicious for, a certain complexity of activities. We see that the large space is actually an octagon, and the octagon has a reputation for being a geometrical figure that perhaps we should employ more often. Actually, even Bjarke Ingels employed it in a recent site plan in Saudi Arabia, an octagonal island. Look how many variations here just on the issue of the color. Again, this man, through geometry, was searching actually for freedom and variety. Montessori School and Wilhelms Park School in Amsterdam, 1980-1983. We saw another Montessori School. Both schools resulted from the same brief as assigned by the government, and as they were developed from principles as identical twins, they also show great similarities. The very limited building site, beautifully situated in a spacious green area, inspired to make villa-style buildings, thus from an urban planning point of view, matching the adjacent large detached houses. Also, the interior of both schools fits to the image of a large house, with the classrooms grouped around the large hall space opening up to the heart of the school, the central place for all events that egress out of the separate classrooms. Gabriel Gatehouse in 2017 reported for the BBC from the Netherlands, where he grew up. Anyway, these are the two buildings. They make me think a little bit of the architecture of Fumihiko Maki in Japan. The interior again shows the breaking down of the walls, of separating entities. I mean, there are separations, but there are also penetrations of these separations. So you have, maybe expressed through some kind of a linguistic exasperation, the solitary aspect of architecture and the solidary aspect. It's both. It's both an architecture that frames, that encloses, but it's also an architecture that opens up, that is solidary. And the solidarity of the spaces has as an effect the solidarity of people, I like to think. Both horizontally and vertically, and also through the sloping planes of, stairs or this approximated amphitheater configuration, which is very conducive to bringing together a possible performer and the possible audience. That is to dialogue. And look at the children. They left their shoes there and they play chess. I mean, again, an open space creates open citizens. They are not yet maybe mature citizens, but you can tell from the way they play, they have a very open attitude towards interacting with each other. They are not inhibited, and they are not inhibiting. Freedom and structure together. Bravo to Herman Hertzberger. I wish more schools were like this. I can only envy these, and I'm glad for them. I can only envy these young people, these children, being taught in such a school. And playfulness is very much part of what they do, and it has to be. Look at them, they are playful. They are not afraid to play. The whole building promotes openness, dialogue, taking risks, playing. And the octagon again here. Otherwise, you could say this is an almost rigid architecture, but it's just a frame, and within the frame, a variety of activities take place. Some thought of, others unexpected. When he said that the public is the beginning of architecture, or at the core of architecture, he actually meant dialogue, breaking down the frontiers, breaking the box. In essence, you break the box when you achieve a public dimension in your architecture. And that public dimension is very, very important indeed, because it's about dialogue, it's about communication, it's about not being alone, it's about togetherness. And again, we see variety in unity, multiplicity in unity. How many configurations here for so-called details? But as it was said, in architecture, there are no details, in the sense that everything belongs to everything else. Ministry of Social Welfare and Employment in The Hague, 1979-1990. This office building for over 2,000 people is organized into individual spaces for nearly everyone. The building structure consists of repeating units, thereby avoiding the endless corridors that occur in so many office blocks. On the side facing the railway embankment, the office spaces would best be situated high up, so as to have a view over the embankment. On the other side, the building has been kept as low as possible to conform to the height of the housing in this area. Instead of an architectural volume containing vast office spaces, we opted, this is the statement of the architect or the architects, we opted for an articulation into different building sections so that the volume is that it, as it were, distributed over a number of separate buildings, grouped along the elongated central area, a number of smaller office buildings together constituting a whole. Again, it's about verity in unity, multiplicity in unity. Each of these more or less self-contained office buildings can accommodate one or more departments, each being individually accessible from the central area. All these departments or combinations of departments are arranged as autonomous units about a glass-covered vertical space that extends over 3 floors. The vertical spaces are to be situated along one of the exterior facades in such a way that all workspaces have an unobstructed view to the outside. Again, it's about communication. Now, it's true that despite the rotation of these prisms, there is, in essence, a certain rigidity. The system is clearly present, maybe too clearly and maybe too much in this case. But it's possible, like in other works by Herman Hertzberger, at the interior, there is a fluidity of space and of functions beyond geometry. And it is, as you can see. At the inside, there are these corridors, these internal streets, if you want, where people can stop, can have a chat, can dialogue, can comment, can have a professional discussion, whatever. And the space communicates horizontally and vertically as well. There is more freedom inside than outside. His buildings towards the outside do not totally give justice to the complexity of spatial configurations that do happen at the interior of the building. And the octagon insinuates itself again. And again, the column, which for him is an architectural event, and he studies this architectural event as carefully as possible. Even the presence of the capital, which some, many architects today avoid to address, he didn't. He felt the need for it. Community center, and maybe the very first word is so telling, community. 2009, 2012, the community center, the Vettering, I am not sure I pronounce well, sorry, consists of the former Dr. Voss School within a new annex. The users and representatives of the neighborhood platform were closely involved in the design. So participation. The existing monumental building from 1922 was renovated and expanded within an annex incorporated in the landscape. The Vettering offers shelter to those companies, I guess, the neighborhood shop and the gym. The police consultation hours takes place here too. By using a building together, the different institutions can work together better and activities for neighborhood residents be matched. So it was an existing building here. In fact, it reminds one a little bit of the architecture of Willem Dudok. So this is an intervention within an existing building, an existing context. The hybridity that he serves through his architecture helps the cause of dialogue, of transgressing frontiers. Despite the clarity of geometry. Now we are approaching the end of the presentation. There are just a few more images. This is a concert hall he built between 1992 and 1995 in Breda. Is this building here? A little different from the other buildings we saw by him. He assumed even, you know, curvatures, which didn't happen often in his architecture before. A concert hall. So maybe, you know, a reference to the fluidity of music. So again, this architect who employed geometry in very convincing and rigorous ways was not turning his back on what we call fluidity in this case. But even in the other cases that we saw, where there was a fluidity of space within, you know, rather well-defined framing through geometry. Herman Hertzberger, closer to our time. As I said, he is 91 years old today. Okay, and I have two more images, an extension of this theater when some new cinemas were added from 2016 to 2020. So this was 3 years ago. The Chassé, I don't know if I pronounce well, theater designed by architect Herman Hertzberger or architects AHH, his name, and the architecture will get extra cinemas. This they already got. The text was written before the building happened. These cinemas will be added as new rounded volumes to the existing building, making them visible in the lobby. So very interesting, you know, these volumes were to be seen or were to be visible from the lobby. Again, in an attempt to break frontiers and create communication between various parts of the building. Both spaces will accommodate about 50 people, so they are small cinemas. To make the cinemas accessible, a new staircase, I could say, was added, which would sink. Now I complicate myself because the work was already done. You are going to see, which will swing through the foyer. The stairs not only serve to go quickly to the cinema spaces, but the visitor moves upwards together with the staircase and sees a spectacle unfolding below of the free-form foyer and the other visitors. Cinema visit becomes more than just watching a movie. It's also watching each other, seeing and being seen, an evening out. And again, it's in the same attempt of serving the public dimension of architecture, serving to reach that dialogue, that communication, that interaction between the members of society. And these are the interior spaces. And yes, you can tell that they are conducive to interaction, horizontally and vertically. So it's not just about placidly sitting in a chair and watching a movie, but it's also about communicating with those who came to the cinema with the same purpose, not only to watch a movie, but also to interact with the others. So indeed, the public dimension of architecture, Herman Hertzberger served consistently all his life. Thank you, and happy birthday, Herman Hertzberger.